So I kind of like the idea that the island, now Wilo's island, is maybe not. Oh, I could point to that on a map, which doesn't go that far out, but everyone's kind of like heard of it because like in the idea of like we call like nice dishware China, right? Because that's where it just like it in like the zeitgeist it came from for colonialist reasons, right? But that idea of like, oh, like yeah, where the nicest shit come from, that's that island. It's like really far away, but they trade with everyone and everywhere.
Yeah, if you can drag your ass down there, you can get the good shit.
Mm-hmm.
Also, their ships like travel really quickly. They don't usually run into storms or sea monsters, but if a pirate tries to attack them, there's a lot of sea monsters.
That's just my idea of maybe how things will be doing in the near future. Might still feel the presence of that place because obviously we're pretty locked in on our not Australia-sized continent.
Well, there was also when I realized that it wasn't going to become the sort of basis of the Undying Empire, just trying to figure out then why is some of the propaganda and stories of like the origin of the Empire so similar? It's because someone who knew was part of it. That's why we included something about, so the guard who failed at his duty to protect the Scion and then watched his god get beaten to death with a rock, forsook his name and left. Wilo and Lotharis no longer remember him, and he may not be the Emperor, but he had something to do with the start of the Empire and why they had the story of the city and the other things that they have.
Well, and it could also be, if we think about, how stories drift, especially across long sea voyages, if we're thinking about this island as a very, like, perceived by the Continentals as, like, a really exotic place, I could see Continentals, particularly anti-imperial ones, telling stories about, like, oh yeah, that's the island where vampires come from. The vampires, they came from there. Doesn't matter if it's right or not. Right? Doesn't matter if it's accurate. It might just be something that they say.
Vampires also have trouble passing over moving water, because I don't think Lotharis likes them very much.
So, The reason I've been talking for a minute is because I've been looking into the history of how continents were named.
Nice. Okay. We're doing this.
Would you be surprised? It's incredibly European
colonial
on why we call them. Yeah, but also a thing that did that me doing this research reminded me of. People who live in a place call it a different name than what other people outside the place call it often.
Oh yeah.
So we call Asia based on a Greek myth, and people in Asia will call it something else entirely. I didn't see the pronunciation on it, so I'm not gonna try because I don't want to fuck it up. But like the point is, we don't have to worry too much about there being like a solid scheme to the names of continents. They can all be inconsistent as to where the names came from. But general rule is the continents were named after, 3 of them were named after Greek myths. Australia was named after a Roman myth, and then America was named after Amerigo Vespucci.
An explorer, yeah.
The only thing I looked up is that it takes 42 days to cross Australia on foot.
I was about to look that up.
The level of research you can expect.
Also, the Arctic and Antarctic just mean bear and no bear.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That one I already knew.
What animal are we naming our continents after on whether or not there is or is not a presence?
Horse.
No horse.
Horse, and they're both no horse. Just 2 different kinds of no horses.
Northern and southern no horse.
Horse.
Yeah, of course.
Hey.
I don't know the Greek word for horse, but yeah, sure, that one.
It would just be like, oh yeah, we're in nor horse.
Nornhurst.
Nor horse. Emily wants to die. I'm so sorry.
That gets shortened to Narnia.
No.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. Actually, we can work with this. Hold on. Ready? I'm gonna throw some syllables out, and we'll just decide if we hate this. Norequis.
Sure.
Hippos is the ancient Greek word for horse, by the way. Like hippodrome.
Hippopotamus means horse. Probably means like water horse or some shit. I don't know. Does it literally?
I think so.
I'm
Pretty
so
sure.
good at language.
It's a hippogriffin when its butt's a horse as opposed to a lion, so this makes perfect sense.
A hippopotamus is a river horse.
I'm so fucking smart.
Yes, you are. There's a couple gods that we haven't talked about yet, specifically
This is true.
Narithma, and we haven't talked about the gods we saw in Fiasco a whole lot. We've been talking for a while, so do we want to talk about Narithma?
We have talked about the Fiasco gods in a way, in that
In a way.
Well, we've talked about the Lucid Realm.
we talked about the Lucid Realm and how that one's also probably metaphorical, which leads to the question of how much do the Lucid gods care about the little moon that we've come up with? Are they moon enjoyers?
So, my headcanon of what the Lucent Realm is. So, Proterra is a pre-existing god. Proterra is like a primordial thing that existed before the Wanderhome gods showed up. The twins are celestial creations, and like they didn't will themselves into existence, but they were created by some kind of being. Tenso says the creator at some point, and that could be metaphorical. That could be like the idea of like, do gods have a god?
Mhm.
But so in my head, the Lucent Realm was essentially an uncharitable way of looking at it is like a prison for Proterra, a way of containing, controlling, and molding the energies of Proterra on the face of the world, right? The idea of what is the first thing you throw into that realm? A bureaucrat, right? And then you have to balance out the bureaucrat with a hedonist, right?
Like a couple of ideas to throw together. The thing that I'm thinking of is the Decameron, and I'm sure that there are other things that are like this, but it's during the Black Plague, a bunch of like nobility would just like fuck off to the countryside and spent like a year in a manor getting up to whatever. And
Mhm.
an idea that's very funny to me is that somebody constructed a prison for Proterra. Proterra being kind of a moody teen that caused trouble. Whoever sort of like was responsible or whatever just decided to send her off to the country. And then a bunch of other gods, when things started going bad, a bunch of other gods just showed up and started hanging out. So it's like, it's Proterra's house. It's not really Proterra's house. Nyaka gets adopted in just because it's amusing, probably to Squid specifically. That's funny to me.
Yeah, so the thing that I like is, I mean, that angle, or like, honestly, the Lucent Realm could just be like a natural byproduct of Proterra, like the like gravity well that Proterra makes is the Lucent Realm, right? And even with her gone, now other things are there. But in my head, Squid is canonically not even a refugee, like an escaped convict from the City of the Gods, right? Like Squid is 100% in my head, not the same as Proterra. Snuck it like a stowaway equivalent, like but in
Pissing
my
people
head,
off and left.
knowing the City of the Gods.
That's the thing I was about to ask. Like, the Lucid Realm in relation to the City of the Gods, is it they are directly connected, or they come from a different city of different gods?
No, so I feel like the Lucent Realm is something of the Game Woven Moon, right? Like
Okay.
in my head, it's of the moon, and whereas the City of the Gods is of the whatever else. So I personally, my headcanon is that the Lucent Realm has something to do with containing or being around Proterra, and then Squid just fucking snuck in there.
Okay.
Not because they got kicked out of wherever they were, for obvious reasons.
So what you're saying is the Lucent Realm was basically where gods go when they've been grounded, and has also kind of turned into middle management for the moon.
It's Godstralia.
Well, here's a thought that I have. If you look at the makeup of the gods who are not Proterra, who therefore are Proterra's wardens, essentially, her prison keepers, Proterra being a primordial, the rest of them are actually very human gods, right? So nature and weather exist whether we do or not, but hedonism does not exist independent of us. Being a persnickety little paper pusher does not exist independent of us. What's fun about Squid is that Squid starts out as this deity of ink and paper, and then reveals at the end, like, haha, by the way, I'm a fucking chaos god, let's go! Which transitions him from sort of a human god into an actual primordial, like, force.
That's true,
god,
yeah.
which I think is very cool.
Yeah, in Greek mythology, there are like those primordial gods, which are like,
Mhm.
we were here
Yeah.
before any of these stories happened. We were just hanging.
Yeah.
Which, and it's also interesting to see what different cultures consider the primordial things. In Greek, I think it was like darkness, chaos, and love were like time. I just remember love is in the primordial one sometimes in like Greek or Roman mythology, which I think is neat as a concept.
Yeah. No, I do also like the idea though that maybe just Squid and Proterra are just two different kinds of primordial chaos as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you said Squid is potentially a stowaway from the planet.
Like, it could be if the Lucent Realm is like a place to contain chaos. Though when Squid either fled or got kicked out of the City of the Gods, the Lucent Realm just kind of like sucked them in because that's what it's supposed to do, right?
There's also the potential for several other Lucent Realm equivalents floating around, which is a potential thing.
Well, and they needn't necessarily be so literal. Like, what is the Lucent Realm attached to? It's attached to nothing. It's a divine place, which
I wasn't
means
being
it is
literal by
independent
floating
of
around.
any of that stuff. You know? Oh yeah. I know what you're saying. But we're also talking like of this. Well, it just is, right? Where is Mount Olympus?
According to Percy Jackson, the 300th floor of the Empire State Building in New York.
Which is funny as fuck.
Which, all this to say, I also think doing the logical next step of that headcanon is that the Lucent Realm is going to collapse in the not too distant future because Proterra is not there.
Yeah.
Tensos deserves better than that. We should get Tensos out.
Oh, I mean, they can escape. They just won't have the Lucent Realm.
Yeah, and also a thing that Rob said about the twins being like made to fill a role, that raised the question of how much do gods care about the people that they're the gods of, you know? This is a thing that comes up in every setting that has gods. Is it a symbiotic relationship? Is it a one leads to the other? Is it a parasitic one on one side? And it could be that the primordial gods have one relation to humans, which is nothing because they exist with or without them. And then there's other gods that exist because of humans or humans exist because of them. And either that raises a lot of things we can think about. I like it.
Which is also interesting if you think about the fact that we have gods which are not of the people of the world, unless the people were made by those gods and therefore also not of the world.
Right, which is another thing that I was like gonna be curious about if we got to finish Wanderhome, which this also leads to the whole Lost Chapter thing of, do the people in Shadow's corridor think they're from those gods or were they already here? You know, that could be a thing to explore later.
100%. That could be, I mean,
like, there's probably a debate on whether or not the gods showed up and adopted them or the gods showed up and made them.
So Rob had pitched the idea that when Letheris let go of all the spies, there was like just this tiniest fraction of LSE's power that remained, and that power came from water. So what if some of that water eventually became the thing that sparked Narithma?
I mean, Narithma sparked herself, and I'm kind of just leaving that.
Language.
Yeah, it could be. There could be creation stories around it. I'm just like,
I mean, there may or may not have been something that happened that roughly, give or take, let's say 3% of godly power that was abandoned.
That is actually spoken for.
And you'll find out what happened in Patchwork.
Yeah, check out
oh
Patchwork.
yeah.
Speaking of Ben, you actually recorded a little Patchwork thing before we officially decided Patchwork was a thing.
Yeah, which I haven't
about?
edited, so none of you have heard it. Would you like me to explain the scene that we cooked up, Anna and I?
Yeah.
Yes.
And hey, if it's done by time this is done, we can just cut out you explaining it and put it in.
That's fair. So I'll tell you this: golden opportunity for Narithma was when I finally did listen back and discovered that Protera can create weather events. Narithma can't create them, but can control nature. And so Protera, being banished to Earth and rendered powerless, gets a visit from Narithma, who gasses Protera up and is like, hey, would you like new management? We should work together because I'm fucking crazy. You're fucking crazy. We can make some beautiful catastrophes. And in the end, Protera does agree to join with Narithma, and together they plan to create the most beautiful hurricanes.
I feel like there's like a god out there somewhere who, like, when Milo with the theirs happened, was just like, oh no. And then Protera Narithma is like, oh no, there's another one. It's happening again.
Here's the thing: they're the opposite, though. It's 100% not like Wailu and Letheris, because they like balance each other out. The explicit thing with this pairing is that they unbalance each other even more wildly.
They bring out the worst in each other.
Yeah.
When they're dating.
And the thing we established was like how our powers work is, combining powers, the sum is greater than the individual parts. So like,
yeah.
Fear.
I've just had another thought about that, though, is when this starts happening, Letheris is going to stop for a chat and try and make an arrangement, so these could still be awesome hurricanes. Don't mess with the ships, so have the sea helping, and there's just these corridors that certain ships can pass through. Otherwise, you can't go anywhere.
Ultimately, like, it's hard to say how hard of boundaries things get drawn around, because ultimately we're talking about larger primordial forces. And, who is to say that a storm caused by, like a preteric storm in the north, does not create multiple sympathetic storms in the south, right? But kind of what I was thinking conceptually, because I always think of deities very allegorically, is that ultimately it's really about the growing sense of calamity represented in the physical world as exceedingly chaotic weather events. I'm imagining the apotheosis of, the reapotheosis of Protera as kind of occurring right around the same time as the early Age of Grey, like after the Council of Grey, once things start getting really gnarly with the war, like also the weather starts to respond.
I mean, what if that first meeting, that was...
Lex is gesticulating wildly. What do you got, Lex?
Sorry, I just remembered part of the thing with the brazen in Zalo is that the weather responds to the people's emotions. Just suddenly remembered that. Remembered that.
That's not just the brazen, but yeah.
Yeah, the whole valley. That just crossed my mind. Which, that says so much about both those things.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
It is very preteric, yeah.
We've fucked with the pathetic fallacy a lot in our work. But, as you were saying, Rob.
I mean, the timing-wise, I think would be to get it grounded somewhere. If the first meeting, which you all and the audience can hear at some point in the future that we can't see, was when Admiral Jack's home volcano at Haggard Point erupted. And then it's been a slow ramp up since. Because that puts us a bit before the Council of Grey, because Jack was alive for muffle years, kind of doing his piratey thing until the events of Kingdom and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that puts us in about the right idea of the time frame.
Which means the second they high-fived, a volcano erupted. And that's just great timing.
I actually have a question about sort of the general set of pantheons we've come up with. Where do you think there are lines where some of the pantheons actually don't interact?
So I know the Wanderhome gods. In my head, they're explicitly the gods of the Shadowell Corridor, or at least in general they are, right? Or like the continent that Shadowell Corridor is on. So I feel like they just don't interact outside of that. So all the gods that we've established that are from other places, the Wanderhome god, just like those are our neighbors, and depending on the individual god is friendly or not with the neighbors. I think in my head anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine DeGale is like neutral.
I think Lethfair specifically would be friendlier towards the people of Shadowell's Corridor, even if she isn't super close with the gods. Because one of the things that Chase Impulse established was she is aware of where the different gods' domains' boundaries are. So, like, she knows when they're getting close, and she's always had a way with people. So I picture she still has that. And uses that to maintain good relationships with some of the other gods, whereas Milo's not as much of a people person.
Rewinding a little bit, because I just had a thought. So, like I just said, DeGale, Goddess of Travel, is like, as far as she's concerned, belongs to Shadowell's Corridor. And we were asking how much of the world have we explored. I feel like if you have the God of Travelers as one of your major patrons, you might have explored a lot. So if there is a map of the world, it's probably only here so far. Maybe, you know? Like, I just had the thought, like, they might be like the exploration capital of the planet or whatever, you know?
That could be true. It could also be true that because of the existence of the Undying Empire, which is, I want to bring something up related to them down the line, that a lot of that is heavily suppressed because they are more interested in conquering what is directly in front of them than they are branching out and searching for new opportunities elsewhere. And that could be presuming that the Undying Empire has control of like the best ports on like the east coast of the continent, going all the way down into the south. Like those are the good fucking ports, right? Maybe the other ports aren't so good for whatever reason, or it's not as populous because of the desert or whatever. The good shit's over here on the south and east, right? The Undying Empire has that. And so, like, how are you going to get that travel going? How are you going to do that age of exploration when these godless, repressive vampires are more concerned with grabbing land inch by inch by inch by inch, you know?
Especially if we're going the route of vampires have trouble over open water. There's a lot of vampire things we never made very clear.
That's
I don't
fine.
think we've made any really big.
At some point, we'll get to it and how specific it is. But it does mean if we are going the trouble over moving water route, it means all of their like leadership can't aid in that exploration along with that.
And of course, they wouldn't be interested in it. They'd be like, well, why would we go over open water? That sucks and it's for losers.
Yeah. If they can't do it, they wouldn't care.
There's so much more of Australia to conquer.
Yeah, we have to conquer Australia.
Yeah, when we're done, we'll build a bridge.
So this does bring me to, I've just remembered, I also did a little patchwork before we made it the patchwork. I got very inspired after listening to some God Potluck stuff and did record a little piece of Imperial propaganda about gods, which was framed as basically imagine the energy of like when a cop would show up to your class and tell you why you shouldn't take drugs, but instead of talking about drugs, it was like a really important imperial official basically being like, hey, we've systematically wiped out a lot of cultures, and the thing we notice is when we forcibly stop them from worshiping their gods, those gods basically go away, right? Once we oppress people and kill them enough that they forget who their gods are, those gods go away. Therefore, gods, bullshit. What you need to worship? The emperor. Why? He exists. He's real, but he's all over our empire and in our heart. And that's the real god. The real god is the emperor that made this empire along the way. And so, that we might cut this part because it may never get released or shown to anyone.
It's really good though.
But like, I at least think that's as something the empire touts as true, feels very like it hits home, and it does. It may or may not have come about during my listening of the Green Hour, in terms of like all these gods that we know existed, and there was like fucking huge family trees and genealogies, right?
Yeah.
And they're just all gone or forgotten or extant, right?
As I've been driving around, I've like had bits where I was just like talking to myself as Old Scratch, and if he ever shows up, I do want him to be like an existential threat to any mortals in the area, but him just being really fucking mad that his boys are dead, that he outlived his sons.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, they ain't wrong, they managed to wipe out a lot of gods.
One thing that I really like about all of our deals is that every single one of us, independent of the others, showed restraint on trying to assign a divinity to the Undying Empire. Even Bree, who was like, you were like right up on the edge of it, and you're like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I like that we all didn't decide to do that and left that section of the map completely blank for now. But also, I think that created a lot of room for us to say things like, okay, we've got all these gods and all their beliefs, and some of them are based on from mortal up, and some of them are based on like from divine down. None of them have anything to do with the Empire, because those guys are dicks.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're an asshole doesn't mean you don't believe in a god.
It might mean the gods don't believe in you.
Or it might mean the gods that they have in the Undying Empire are ones that the other gods want nothing to do with.
Yeah. It could also mean the gods in the Undying Empire are like super chill with not being prayed to. They're like, this shit's sick. I love this.
Leave me, like, pray to me less.
Yeah. No, this shit, amazing.
I did establish a little bit connecting Milo and Lotharius to the Undying Empire, but mostly in that they can feel people praying to them in this continent, and they can't see anything, and it's driving him nuts.
So,
Well, and it could also be, it's more like the concept of undeath, but that isn't necessarily a direct link to the Undying Empire. The Undying Empire just uses the mechanics of undeath to perpetuate an expansionist colonial regime.
You don't need to pray to the god of fire to make a campfire.
So, Chase and I in the epilogue talked a little bit about like what does worship of your god, of our gods look like, and one of the things he said that's like Wilo considers something as simple as like the exchange of goods for money, like commerce, as a prayer. People trying to make and sell things to make the world better as essentially a prayer.
That is not at all what I got from that little epilogue.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not.
Oh, Wilo is insidious. Well, Theris is there to keep them
I
from
got everything
going.
bad with capitalism off of him.
I wonder if the people from that part of the world have a special word that means thank you, but it's a very specific thank you. It's like simultaneously saying thank you and good trade. You'll like spit in your palm and you'll shake hand and you'll say Wilo or something like that. And that's like sort of like a salam alaikum, but for like merchants who sort of exchange this deific honorarium between each other as like as a thank you.
I mean, that they probably do if you want to make the word.
Yeah. Those two are also very popular with traders, merchants, pirates specifically, because you want both of them to like you, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. You don't renege on a deal in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, I don't like gods that involved.
You don't like gods that involved?
I don't like gods that directly involved.
Mm.
It's like you are holding me hostage in this situation. I'm going to kill these gods.
It's like, well, that dude just screwed some people over, so let's send this sea monster. He's hungry. Okay, what were we talking about?
Etymology thing for Ben coming up with that word, if you feel like it. The first word that came to mind was goodbye, which initially was God be with ye. So I can imagine you could sum up something similar. This doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be in the final cut. Just a thing for Ben.
Well, okay, so hold on. So it might be something like let's create the original turn of phrase really quick. It might be something like Wilo bless this trade, or Wilo here, or like Wilo's here, or something like that. You're shaking hands like, oh, this is such a good trade, Wilo.
Wilo Smilo's on us.
Yeah.
And now Wilo witnesses it, right?
Yeah, and so maybe what they say is something. I think was it Emily or Zed, like Willir?
I said Willir.
Like you'll shake hands, Willir. Boom, there it is, and it gets like condensed down.
We did it.
Yeah.
We did it.
Circling back a little bit to like how much deities interact, I like the idea as well. Like in my head, the Lucent Realm deities are pretty removed because they feel very like mortals up as opposed to gods down in terms of, they just are of heathenism and diligence, right? A lot of worship of the heathenism would just be like scribes and artists, right? Like pursuing passions. So it feels like a pretty like insular group. Although I do love the idea that for the Bowerborn, Tensos just kind of showed up to be like, you've never happened before. I need to write some stuff down. What do you even? I got like 1,000 questions. So first one, like, what do you even call yourself?
Speaking of the Bowerborn, I had a question for Zad.
Ooh.
This might have been answered, I just missed it or forgot it. How aware is the Undying Empire of the Bowerborn?
Ben, I think, probably has an idea. You're playing directly in this space, Ben. What were you waving for?
I am, yeah. Depending on where we're at time-wise, I think the Empire is aware that this specific region is becoming troublesome, but they don't understand why.
Yeah, can't grok what the problem is. And the problem is less that they have gods now and more that they're organizing, but they're organizing because they have gods. And like, it's becoming more and more difficult for vampires specifically to get in because of the increase in divine activity. But it's just like, ultimately it's a province. It's like, if you didn't have mass communications, somebody in Washington, D.C. is like, hey, there's some stuff that's happening out in Indiana. And people would be like, oh, that's the one that looks like the boot, right? No, sorry, wait, wrong one. So I think it's like, they know that there's trouble brewing, and the Counts reported it up to the Duke, and the Duke probably like removed a number of them, and because they didn't feel like they were doing their jobs. And then now like the Duke is like, oh, wait a minute, this is getting to be a problem. But then like the king is busy. It's starting to percolate up the hierarchy, but not moving terribly fast because the vampires don't care.
And then so what do you do if you're a count who's extremely politically vulnerable, or a duke who's worried about too much oversight from the king? You send in 100 brazen about it and say, go figure it out. Kill who you kill, but fix it. And that's kind of how the Brazen's March starts.
And also the idea of like large organizations, and especially ones that are looking to be like colonialist and fascist, like don't really care about the finer points. So like the intricacies of like the Bowerborn would easily be lost on the Empire as it moves up the command chain. So like the report could be, oh yeah, these like communities are starting to come together around these like semi-deific figures, and then what the like Baron hears is, oh, they have new gods. And I'm like, no, we killed those gods. That's okay, actually. So never mind. It's probably just nothing. Or like, no, we know how to look for gods. We looked. There's no gods there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's no deities. We can't find any. You're good, actually. So whew, we're set. Because like the Bowerborn, like yeah, they're deific, but they're not like gods.
Right.
They're not deities in the same way that the Empire would know to look for them.
You could probably play a Bowerborn as a class, like in the Game Woven TTRPG. Like that'd be pretty fun, actually.
When I was thinking about how to put it into 5e, as an ancestry, the Bowerborn god bonus is just, in my head, was just like, I don't know, pick a second background. That's what it means to be one of these young gods. You get a second background, which is like a few more skills and a ribbon or two, and that's about it.
If you really wanted to lean into it and like that's your character is like a deity of a very specific thing, you could run it like a Pathfinder kineticist, but you only have control over your specific thing.
Yeah. And then maybe like the Revenant rules or something. Yeah.
You can command all ladybugs which are currently flying above the like at least 2 feet above the ground. That is your special power.
I want to be the god of petty revenge.
Yeah, it's got to be something appropriately specific, but if you can pin that down, then you actually have a staggering amount of control over it.
We stand small gods here.
All the freaking ladybugs? Guess what you're going to do with all them ladybugs? That's a bug bomb. You know, like, yeah.
I did want to actually, we're talking about like the involvement between the gods and their people. I think for Wilo and Lotharius, they were probably more directly involved at first, but as time went on, they started like stepping farther and farther back and getting more involved and connected on the divine side, but they haven't like forgotten their people. They're just at this point in time, they're watching on a grander scale, because also I imagine their people have spread a lot farther.
So maybe it's like the original sort of island nation is exceptionally well protected, and like the original trade lines are pretty solid, but the further away you get from this epicenter, you know, it's not even necessarily the less they see, it's just the less they've put in place, and so the more kind of on your own. It's almost like if you were a level 0 in an MMORPG, and like the home island is your starting island, and then you get out further and all the enemies get higher and higher level.
They're higher level because the god isn't actively helping you anymore, not because they're getting stronger.
They can still hear you, like, especially, Lotharius has always, in my mind, been more of, like, the people person, and I established, like, one of the ways that you can pray to her is to whisper a wish into a well.
Which is dope, but it's like, where, like, how much, so there's, okay, Lotharius is hearing people, but how much is Lotharius actually responding directly?
So, the thought I had, and Lex, actually, this might be a bit of a longer one, so maybe Lex, did you have a thought you wanted to add in first?
I did, because the thing we're talking about is how much the gods interact with people. A consistent thing that we did for all of the gods for a long time was the little blessings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we've only established that for the corridor. So it could be that is like a thing that those gods do that not every god does, you know?
Right, and to do it even more is like, this is to have cultural practices amongst gods for a region is fun.
Yeah.
It's not that the Wanderhome gods couldn't do that, it's just they don't think to. It's not like an etiquette that they observe.
Yeah, so if we like this is a thing we don't have to canonize, which is a thing in my mind is like, if we take all the random specific blessings that we've handed out and go work backwards, that means any blessing of that means they're from the same, like they're of the Wanderhome pantheon in a way, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a thing we could do, we don't have to, it's just a thought.
Narithma does stuff under very specific circumstances, is all we've established so far.
I'll answer the question. How much does Narithma interact with her worshippers? Not at all. Does not care.
Nope.
Narithma is entirely responsive to events and weather and time. Couldn't give a shit less about the people.
So, this is actually something which I feel like I actually kind of was thinking about the whole time during Fiasco, because Nayaka's arc turned into, oh, I am a person who has become a god, and that means I have a strong set of like morality and like what would I want a god to do, and I'm gonna try and do that. And the end of that arc was, oh, no, this is bad actually. I'm gonna step away from the world and who I was into divinity and becoming Odette. The way that manifested was like losing the like heroism part of like the morality of like heroism into just more like ambition and heroes and villains, right? So like in my head, okay, so in my head, being a god is like playing Honey Heist. Because in Honey Heist, you have two stats, right? You criminal and bear, and if you go all the way to criminal, you run away and are a villain, and if you go all the way bear, you're just a fucking bear, right? So like you have two stats, you have human and divine, right? So if you're 1 on human, you're just a mortal person. And if you're 6, you are the forgotten god, right? Where you go so existential, it's unsustainable. So like the Bowerborn are a 2. Narithma is like a 3, because Narithma like does miracles and like runs around like fucking shit up, but doesn't care about like, you know, like answering prayers or divinely intervening, except when the fancy strikes them. So like in my head, most deities are on like a solid 4, where like they are like paying active attention and trying to see where things are going right and wrong and answering whatever prayer. But then there are some like Tensos, who's like a 5, where it's like, no, I've got a job. Like I do something here. You all do your whatever. I'm gonna make sure you don't break anything, right? I've got a whole domain here. Like I have to look over war and blood and iron, like whatever that ends up being, right? So in my head, that's where it is, where it's like the Bowerborn are very they really don't have a divine presence outside of their like physical self, really. And then like Narithma really only cares about stuff that's like in front of their face, quote unquote, I would put it. And then most deities are at like the 4 level, and then the weirder ones are at 5.
And if we look at some of the gods that are Wilo and all that, who are a little bit more directly involved in human life, you know, that's kind of a different sense of.
Mm-hmm.
You could almost think of like the gods on the central continent aren't like, you couldn't be a cleric of the travel god and expect to get divine spell casting, because that's not how that god works. That god doesn't just like hand you mirror, because that god doesn't give a shit. That god is going to give you like magic hoof feet because you asked to be able to run fast. And it's like, here you go, here's hooves, you can run fast now, you know?
The way I often look at divinity, it's like, it's kind of like spending money. Some gods invest, some gods can't save and just spend it all willy-nilly. Some hoard it, and that's why they don't do any miracles or whatever. And so like, I don't know, I kind of see the gods that we started with, they're like, they hear a prayer and the prayer's like, can I borrow $5? And they're like, sure, here's 7 or whatever.
But with interest.
Yeah, pay me back later or whatever, but pay me back later, it means like, yeah, the curse that comes with it. That's the pay me back later part.
Like, yeah, you can run without getting tired, but you have to run 18 hours a day minimum.
Yeah. But then you've got gods who are like, no, these are my people. I came up from this island. I still feel very much, kind of at least to a certain extent, part of the fabric of this society. It is my duty to help them. And there might be other gods that aren't the Southern Island gods who also feel that way to some extent.
It's like, for some gods, humans are just like pets. Some humans are just kind of bugs in their that they step on, and some they're like employees, you know.
I mean, Gladios literally summons mortals near constantly to do minor tasks in the lucid realm, right?
Chase might have more than once referred to the 13 who immediately decided to follow Lilo as his board of directors.
Yeah. Right. I feel like the Southern Island gods, especially, like they've got an agenda. They're not just like distant, sort of like divine beings casting things around when, like, just based on their divine whim. They're like, no, I got an agenda. I've got a country. Like, they're almost like a fucking head of state. Like, you could literally rule by divine right because there is a chance that a god could come down and be like, that guy. And then like
Lilo wanted to connect people in a way they hadn't before. Like, it's a good goal. Did they lose the warmth behind that goal? Yes, but that's what they have Lotharius for. It's just unfortunate that she lost her restraint because she was the voice of reason. And now there will be times when Milo is the voice of reason, and that's concerning.
And that's why I want to kill them someday.
Don't kill my girl.
About the Wanderhome gods, almost all of them in some way weren't happy with their current role. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
So another thing that could be why gods hand out powers like they do is like, I don't want it, take it, leave.
They're giving this stuff away.
I don't want to be rich anymore, take it, get out.
I mean,
You know?
there's also the idea of the more you directly invest, right, to use that kind of like money terminology, the less like reach you have, right? Like, like maybe unbeknownst to them, if Wilo and Lotharius weren't so invested in where they were from, they could see all the people who were doing transactions everywhere, right? But they've like anchored themselves somewhere. They've focused their cash flow to those southern islands, and that means the reach is lessened.
I think, to borrow a term from Civilization Builder games, it's building tall or building wide.
Yeah. 100%.
One opulent, wildly successful city, or 8 tiny, hyper-specific ones with little things they focus on.
Or generations of minorly divine children. Those are our extremes, right?
I picture Lotharius might go a little more wide, but she absolutely supports what Milo does, and who knows what their kids do. We didn't talk about that.
Kids?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we never did at any point establish, can gods have kids? I don't know, we'll figure it out.
I have to be able to, because that's more dramatic.
There was a whole family tree in a green hour.
Oh yeah, you're right, yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah.
What am I saying?
Yeah.
Silly me. I meant more in the like Greek way of like, you know,
Demigod?
oh yeah, the Greek way.
what does that mean? Ben,
I don't know.
what could that?
What if you could say that again and then explain it in detail?
Never.
Show your work.
That does
Show your
have
work.
Zeus vibes to it, though, I will say.
Yeah, I meant like Zeus does have 11 bajillion kids who are all gods in their own right, not demigods. They're all full-fledged gods who are, as far as we know, on par with him. I was thinking in that sense. I'm just thinking out loud now.
That's what the show is, baby.
That's what
Yeah.
the show is, baby.
It's cross-stitch.
It feels
Watch
like
it.
you'd be shutting so many narrative doors to say that gods can't have
Yeah,
babies
absolutely.
who are
Yeah.
either gods or demigods. Or I love the idea of a god has a child and they are in no way divine.
It's a normal guy.
Like, you got none of the perks.
That's definitely something that happens in the Bowerlands.
Oh my god.
I can say that definitively. They can just have normal ass children. Their families age, you know. I mean, it would probably suck to outlive your kids, but when you're a god and the kid isn't, like, it's just kind of how it goes.
Oopsie.
I want my Blorbo to be a kid of a god who didn't get any powers, but is like so sought after because everyone thinks that they are like gonna be like inheriting like divine fortunes. So they're just like constantly like cults are like, yes, we will capture you, and with your blood we will ascend to you. He's like, I can't cast a single spell.
So it's like the Cult of the Lamb meets Encanto.
Right. Yeah.
So, I had another idea for a character for the God Killer game before we decided to go with Lotheris, and it was going to be using the Godling, where it's like they're the child of a mortal and a god whose love was not meant to be. But my thought was, they're a couple generations away from the original Godling, but the godly parent was the god of reincarnation, who is now gone. And since they were the god of reincarnation, that divinity continued on and exactly as strong as it was before, and then she would go to kill the god of undeath. Chase actually pitched playing a game as Lotheris. He was like, but I want to play Lotheris. My random NPC I threw at you and then you just, like, glommed on. I obsessed over her for several days.
Hell yeah.
I got to beat a god to death with my bare hands. It was great. I know you don't like her, Emily.
I personally don't like anything that implies that there's a bajillion gods wandering around. The fewer gods around, the better.
You don't like
No gods, no
domination?
kings. I don't like it. It makes me uncomfy and unhappy. Having gods that directly involved in all of this. Like, no matter what you do, the gods get final say. That's not... No.
I feel like we were saying, like, it's definitely like different gods take different approaches to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a parent that's like, hey, you're 18, you're on your own now, get out. There's the parents who are like, you're 30, your room is the exact same way you left it. And then there's, the hyper-controlling parents who are like, no, you're staying here till you die.
Yeah, I like to think that Lilo and Lotheris start to get, like, more hands off as time goes on. But they are still protective of their people.
I like to imagine, kind of to Emily's point, like there was a point in history where like God meddling hit such like a kind of unsustainable peak that there were so many like prophecies that they literally couldn't all come true. And so gods had to stop like all like kind of like unspoken agreement, be like, we can't keep, because cause people were like really getting pissed because like they were like, oh, this prophecy definitely gonna come true. Gonna build my entire life and personality around it, and then it just wouldn't happen because all the other gods were doing stuff.
And that's where the Forgotten God was created, to get all that shit in line. And then forgot it.
But also, honestly, like isn't that a Neil Gaiman novel? I feel like that must be like that sounds very Discworld.
American gods.
There being so many prophecies that somebody had to go and sort it out. That's a Neil Gaiman short story pitch. The Sweeper of Dreams is a poem. There's a poem that he wrote, and the Sweeper of Dreams comes and cleans your head out after you've dreamed. And if you piss the Sweeper of Dreams off, then he stops coming and it goes bad for you. That feels like a Sandman. That feels like a Sandman story. Too many prophecies.
Yeah.
I actually am starting to get very emotionally attached to the idea of people treating prophecies in the game over world like we treat seeing an unknown number calling us, where it's like, yeah, I bet my car's warranty is about to expire, isn't it? Oh, I'm prophesized to do this, am I? Oh, you don't say. Wow. If I just went about my normal life. If I just went about my normal life, this probably wouldn't happen, would it?
Which changes a lot of the flavor of Tristan existing. Because if that's the general like consensus to prophecies, and then Tristan's like, no, I have like 100% accuracy all the time, forever.
It's not a prophecy when Tristan says it, it's seeing the future. Because like Tristan's not a god with an agenda. He's a person with an agenda, but like he's not like saying this will happen. Like, he's just saying, oh, I'm pretty sure this is going to happen.
Yeah.
A very small but very distinct change, right? Maybe. But I just like the idea of you get a prophecy when you're 16, you're like, delete.
Sure.
Like, you filter it out like spam.
I sent you a prophecy, please respond.
At some point, that
like a divine herald's like,
with prophecy and chosen one tropes, and you're going to really like it whenever I get around to writing it. But continuing on.
And it could be like that's why the core like Wanderhome gods. We are so far in headcanon land now.
Yep.
It could also be why the core Wanderhome gods have chosen to act through ironic gifts instead of direct prophecies, because no one takes that shit seriously, but everyone takes the Silver Tongue seriously.
Yeah.
Everyone takes responsible weather seriously. Bronze Eyes. If you get too pissy, you turn into a monster. They'll take that seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
I mean, as well, though, maybe prophecies are now bogus because the Forgotten God was like the actual only in-canon source of 100% accurate prophecies. Everything else is technically just guesswork, right? Like, if it comes from the Forgotten God's mouth, that's a prophecy. That's going to happen in some shape or form, no matter
Forgotten Mouth is my other band name.
Yeah, if it comes from like another god, it's more like when your regional manager is like, you're going to clean this store up. Like, yeah, we'll fucking see. You know, like...
We're influencing this to be true.
Yeah, like they're coming down and they're phrasing a prediction, but it's really more of like a, could you clean the store up, please?
Yeah.
It's like, how did this not come true? Stars, not a line.
Yeah.
It's like when your parents do the thing of like, it'd be really great if someone could take out the trash.
It's also why a lot of prophecies use such vague wording, so it can be like, no, yeah, this is how this falls into what I said. You just thought the wrong thing.
Okay, do we want to go to the wrap-up? Because I feel like we can keep going down this rabbit hole forever.
We can. That's why we're making this show.
Yeah. All the bonus rambling, if you want to make a Patreon cut to keep all the stupid shit, feel free.
If you want to say even more stuff, support us on our Patreon, and we'll be incentivized to do more rambling.
Exactly.
So we're going to wrap up our episode here. This has been an episode of Cross Stitch, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And say hi to Ted for me. Okay? Have a good night, gang.
I do prophesy that you will have a wonderful day.
The arc is complete. Let's come back around.
It shall be as was foretold.
Hey.
Thank you for listening to Game Woven. Please give us a follow on social media at Game Woven. Join the Discord, support the Patreon, and consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. This week's episode featured Lex Olden at Call Me They, Benjamin Drury at TT Benjamin, Robbie Rolling at Robbie Rolling, Zadkiel Vaske-Huff at Zadkiel and Green, Brianna Jean at Brianna Jean, and Emily at As Was Foretold.